Hello, my name is Nancy Fudge and I'm an author and local Pennsylvania historian. Today I'm going to tell you a story about the Barnett family who lived right here in Pennsylvania during the French and Indian War. The story was passed by word of mouth from the 1760s down to the 1880s, where it was recorded by William Henry Egle in the Histories of Dauphin and Lebanon counties in the Pennsylvania Archive series. This story really humanizes the French and Indian War, following the path of a family who struggled through that period. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Dan Fenton. I am a reenactor. I portray a soldier of the Pennsylvania Regiment during the French and Indian War in Pennsylvania from the time period 1756 to 1758. During the French and Indian War period, starting approximately 1754, was very troubling. The mountains you see behind me were known as the Blue Mountains, among other names that they were given, and that was the edge of the frontier in Pennsylvania. Most settlers did not go north or west of these mountains. However, many did, and that angered the Indians, who petitioned the Assembly in Philadelphia to make those people leave, because that was the Indian hunting grounds and they did not have right to be there. And the Assembly did. They sent people out and they would kick them out from time to time. However, there's just the influx of settlers into the area, mostly east and south of the Blue Mountain, but also some that went west and north of the Blue Mountain, created plantations, farms, farmsteads, and hacked their living out of the woods to make that happen. And it was very tough. It was very dangerous. Most of the people, it is written, did not have any type of firearms or any type of protection. So if an Indians did raid them, they didn't have much to protect themselves other than maybe some farm implements or an axe or something.
My name is Bruce Baumberger. I've worked for the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission for almost 36 years, and I'm the archivist now at the Lebanon County Historical Society. In Pennsylvania, it was different than it had been in other colonies. The relationships with the Indians were fairly peaceful. William Penn had treated them more fairly than other proprietors had treated the Indians, and treated them, if not like equals, certainly as human beings. And so we didn't have the combat with Indians like we did in the early days in Massachusetts, or when the pressure of settlement in Pennsylvania went over the mountains and some of the Indians were excluded from their hunting land and they began to attack. Of course, the settlers wanted to be protected. The Indians' land ownership could best be described as the ability to hunt in a certain area and take the game when these things were in season and then move on to another area. Not that the Indians didn't eventually establish villages, which they did, but it wasn't the same as white property ownership where you bought a deed and then you owned that land and you put a house on it, and that's where you would expect it to live until you sold it.
The French Indian War in Pennsylvania was rather unique. In Pennsylvania, there was no standing military or militia system in place because of the Quakers. The Quakers were peaceful. They didn't want to have any type of military. So it took until 1756, well into the Indian raids and the French defeating Braddock in 1755, until the Assembly in Philadelphia decided to finally create some type of military force to protect the frontier in Pennsylvania.
During the time of the French-Indian War, 1757 to 1763, the people that lived along the Pennsylvania frontier were right here at the Blue Mountain behind me. Indian attacks would come through the gaps in the Blue Mountain, including one called Manada Gap, which is right behind me here. The settlers would press into Indian territory, and the Indians, with the French support, would respond to try to pressure the British settlers to leave. This story documents a family, the Barnett family, who lived right behind me at Fort Manada along the Blue Mountain here in Hanover Township. In 1757, British settler Joseph Barnett and his family settled in Hanover Township in Lancaster County on the Pennsylvania frontier. He and his father and his friend, Mr. McKee, were coming in from working the fields when they were ambushed by a raiding party of Indians working for the French. Mr. Mackey was the first to fall with a gunshot to the gut. Barnett's father ran for help. Barnett was shot in the arm.
They very much wanted to have, of course, were firearms. Traders at first did trade firearms to the Indians, and so they did learn to use them. They also traded things like metal knives.
The Indians scalped Mr. Mackey. They got good money from the French for scalping their enemies and bringing them and trading them for money and steel up in Canada. Barnett found a field where he hid. Mr. Barnett hid in the field for over a day before his neighbors found him and took him for help. He was extremely worried for his family who lived on Manada Hill. Luckily, almost all his family made it into the fort at one of their homesteads. Unfortunately, not only Mr. Barnett, but Mr. Mackey's son were taken by the Indians that attacked them. Mr. Mackey's son was traded to the French and later found his way back to Pennsylvania. But William Barnett was taken by the Indians. William Barnett was not traded to the French. Instead, William Barnett was found by one of the squaws. The squaw, having also lost a son about his age, took him and raised him as her own. She told William that his family was all dead and that they were their only family, and he believed her. And he actually came to love his squaw mother. In 1760, in the middle of the French-Indian War, as things started to calm down on the eastern section, the Indians proposed a prisoner exchange where they would bring their captured Pennsylvanians and other people to Fort Pittsburgh. But to get there, Barnett had to cross the Appalachian Mountains. It was a 210-mile journey as the crow flies, and this was going up and down very steep and very treacherous terrain.
Today I am portraying George Croghan. George Croghan was a very important person during this time period, and even before this time period. He was an Irish immigrant who came to America in 1741 and almost immediately went to the frontier in the western part of the province of Pennsylvania to set up trading posts to trade with the Indians, fur trades, and bring them back to Philadelphia to a man named Edward Shippen, who was a big name in the trading business, and that's how he made his money. That's how he made his living.
Now, if you were to want to travel from this area, or Dauphin County, say, out to Fort Pitt, it would be very difficult. You would be traveling over Indian and settler trader routes, usually single file. These were not roads, but they were paths through the wilderness. In various places, of course, you had to get over the different the ridges and peaks of Appalachian Mountains, and the Allegheny Mountain was the steepest and highest of those ridges.
Fort Pitt was a British fort that was built near the remains of Fort Duquesne. Fort Duquesne was a French fort that was established at the forks of the Ohio, which is the confluence of the Allegheny and the Manada Hill River that created the Ohio River. So in that area was very important for the fur trade. So the French came down from Canada and established a fort there and held that fort for 4 years until the British came in 1758. The French were overwhelmed because they were losing manpower, and they also lost their Indian allies because of the Treaty of Easton. So they burned and blew up their own fort and then retreated north towards Canada. And then the British came in and built Fort Pitt.
Joseph Barnett went to find his son, but when he got there, discovered that they didn't find him. They didn't know where he was. The Indians did know where he was, but he didn't want to leave his squaw mother, and his squaw mother was not willing to give him up. She loved him very deeply.
If there was a son that had died years ago, or if there was somebody that needed to be replaced within that tribe, the captives took that place. A lot of them wanted to stay there. They did not want to be rescued. They wanted to stay part of this Indian culture. Many times because they were captured young, and that's really all they really knew. And they did not want to come back to civilization. They wanted to stay with the Indian tribes. But many of them did want to come back. Many of them escaped. Many of them tried to escape many times. And there were also treaties and meetings with the Indians to reclaim some of these captives that were taken during the war.
During his time at Fort Pitt, the Indians that were not friendly to the British began attacking the fort. Mr. Barnett was very thirsty. He went to go get a drink, and right across the stream from him, a soldier was shot in the head. Surprised that his drink would be so costly, Mr. Barnett decided it was time to return to Hanover, Pennsylvania, and his family. He'd been away for too long. He talked to Colonel Croghan and told him that he needed to go. He gave Colonel Croghan money in hopes that Colonel Croghan could exchange it with some friendly Indians or some trappers in return for his son. When he returned home, he had nothing to give his family. His wife was heartbroken, but they knew that God would protect their William and hopefully return their son to them.
But really, the wars for trade are what really began to decimate the Native American population very early on, even before the French and Indian War, because the tribes fought among themselves just to be in the best position to trade with the white Europeans. And so the whole fur trade was a very destructive thing, and yet something that they wanted to return to those better times of being able to bring pelts and get things like metals and even firearms and metal tools in place of the lithic or stone tools they had been using.
William loved his squaw mother. He had been told his father and family were dead. He saw his new mother as his only family, and he didn't want to leave her. With money in hand, the British trappers and the friendly Native Americans went and hunted for William. They found William with his squaw mom, and they forcibly took him away. William didn't want to go. ran away several times from the trappers and several times from the British when they tried to take him back over the Appalachians. They ended up stopping at an inn in Carlisle. It just so happens that his father, Joseph Barnett, was visiting Carlisle and was staying at that very same inn. When he realized that his son was upstairs, nothing could stop him. Even the landlady was like, he needs to sleep, he needs to sleep. And Mr. Barnett was like, no, you don't understand, I've not seen my son in 3 years. And he convinced her to take him up, and they woke him.
William, your father's here.
My father's dead.
William. William.
Father.
My son.
3 years after he was kidnapped, William returned home. Thank you for watching this short history of one family's experience during the French Indian War. I'd like to thank the reenactors and the historians and the experts, the costumers, my friends and family who helped make this video possible. Thank you so much. And it makes me come to wonder, what about our own history? Will we be remembered? Will our stories be passed down from generation to generation? So 260 years from now, will people remember who we are and the things we experienced? Thank you again for watching.